Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt something strange, like their smile didn't match the energy behind it? It's unsettling, isn't it? Because we are taught from childhood to trust a smile, to take it as a sign of warmth, kindness, and good intentions. But life teaches us a harder truth. Not every smile is sincere. Some smiles are masks, thin veils that hide envy, resentment, or even malice. Think about it. The people who hurt us most deeply are rarely strangers. It's almost never the person we pass on the street. It's the friend who sat at our table, the relative who grew up beside us, the colleague who laughed with us in the office. They know our stories, our secrets, and our weaknesses. And because they know, they also have the power to wound us in ways outsiders never could. This is why Shi Heng Yi reminds us to be cautious. He says demons don't always appear with horns and fire. They often wear familiar faces, sometimes even the faces we love. It's not about becoming paranoid, it's about becoming aware, because awareness is what keeps us from being deceived by appearances. A smiling face can be genuine, yes, but it can also be a mask. And once you realize this, you stop being naive. You stop assuming that every kind word is rooted in kindness, that every embrace comes from love. You start looking deeper into patterns, into actions, into the subtle energies that reveal who a person truly is. This awareness does not make us cold or distant. It makes us wise. Because wisdom isn't about shutting people out. It's about letting the right ones in. And so, as we begin this journey together, remember this simple truth. Not every smile is meant to comfort you. Some are meant to disarm you. When words deceive us, when smiles mislead us, there is still something that never lies: energy. Every person carries a certain vibration, a subtle field that speaks louder than anything their mouth could say. Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt heavy, as if the air itself was suffocating you? No one said a word, yet you felt the tension, the unspoken hostility. That's energy. Or maybe you met someone for the very first time, and even before they introduced themselves, you felt strangely uplifted, safe, inspired, at ease. That too is energy. We live in a world where people are skilled at pretending. They wear masks, they choose the right words, they craft an image. But no matter how carefully they polish the outside, the energy within them always leaks through. It's in their body language, in the way their eyes shift, in the silence between their words. It's the invisible signature that cannot be forged. Shi Heng Yi teaches that demons, those who secretly drain us, envy us, or wish us harm, will eventually reveal themselves through their energy. They might smile, they might praise, they might act supportive. But deep down, their energy carries a frequency of jealousy, control, or manipulation. And if we pay attention, we can feel it. This is why intuition is such a powerful guide. The mind can be fooled, but the body rarely is. Notice how your chest tightens when someone toxic enters the room. Notice how your shoulders relax when you're around someone genuine. Your body is constantly reading energy, even when your rational mind tries to explain it away. The truth is, energy never lies. It whispers to us, warning us of hidden threats, nudging us toward people who nourish our soul, but only if we are willing to listen. So the next time you feel that subtle unease, don't dismiss it. Don't silence it with excuses like, maybe I'm imagining things. That unease is wisdom speaking. That quiet discomfort is your protection. Words may lie, smiles may deceive, but energy will always reveal the truth. If energy never lies, then why do so many people still fall into traps, still get deceived? Because demons, the ones hidden in friends and family, are masters at twisting the truth. They don't usually attack with open hostility. No, that would be too obvious. Instead, they bend reality little by little until you begin to doubt yourself. It might sound like a small comment, "Are you sure you remember it right?" Or a subtle jab, "You're always too sensitive." Each time they plant a seed of confusion, and slowly you start questioning your own perception. This tactic is powerful because it makes you rely less on your instincts and more on their version of the story. It's not that the truth disappears, it's that it gets buried under layers of distortion. Like a mirror covered in dust, You can still see your reflection, but it's no longer clear. Shi Heng Yi warns us, when someone constantly reshapes the truth, it's not a mistake, it's a strategy. It's how hidden demons protect themselves, how they keep control, how they weaken your trust in your own judgment. And once they succeed, they can pull you deeper into their narrative. But here's the secret: truth is resilient. No matter how much it gets twisted, it always leaves clues. A story that doesn't quite add up. A detail that changes from one day to the next. An excuse that feels rehearsed. If you're attentive, you'll notice the cracks. And those cracks are invitations to step back, to breathe, and to remember your inner compass. Because the moment you reclaim your own perception, their manipulation loses its grip. When you stop letting others define your reality, you step back into your power. So don't be fooled when the truth feels clouded. Trust that deep down you already know. Your clarity is your weapon, and no amount of distortion can erase it. There's a certain kind of darkness that reveals itself not through anger, not through open hostility, but through the quiet satisfaction someone takes in your suffering. Have you ever noticed it? You share good news, and instead of genuine excitement, their smile feels forced, their congratulations sound hollow. But when you stumble, when you fail, when life knocks you down, suddenly they seem a little too comfortable. Sometimes they even laugh, masking it as a joke, but deep inside they are celebrating. This is one of the clearest signs of a hidden demon. They can't stand your light because it reminds them of their own darkness. They can't celebrate your growth because it exposes their stagnation. So instead, they find joy in your pain, comfort in your struggles, and secretly wish for your downfall. Shi Heng Yi reminds us that these people are dangerous, not because they attack directly, but because they quietly feed on your misery. They want to see you weak because your weakness makes them feel strong. They want to see you hurt because your pain validates their envy. It's a bitter truth, but sometimes those who claim to be closest to us, friends, colleagues, even family, are the very ones silently hoping we don't succeed. And here's the trap: we often excuse their behavior. We tell ourselves, maybe they didn't mean it that way, or I'm just imagining things. But energy never lies, and patterns don't lie either. If someone consistently brightens when you fall and dims when you rise, it's not your imagination, it's their truth. The challenge then is not to let their secret joy at your pain poison your spirit. Because the danger isn't just that they celebrate your struggles, it's that you might start dimming your own light just to keep them comfortable. But remember this: your life is not meant to be lived small. Your joy is sacred, and your growth is your birthright. And if someone can't celebrate that, they don't deserve a seat at your table. So watch closely. See who claps when you win and who smirks when you stumble. That alone will tell you who truly walks with you and who only lingers to enjoy your fall. There's another way hidden demons reveal themselves: by the way they treat your boundaries. Respect is simple. When someone truly values you, they honor your limits, even when those limits are inconvenient for them. But when someone doesn't respect you, they test you. They push, they cross lines, and they disguise it as humor, as habit, or as love. Think about it. Maybe you've said, "I don't want to talk about this." Yet somehow the conversation finds its way back. Or you've drawn a line: "Please don't touch my things, don't mock my choices, don't invade my space." But the next moment they do it again. Each time they act surprised, as if they didn't know. But they knew. They just didn't care. Shi Heng Yi calls this one of the clearest tests of respect. Because people who honor you will stop when you say no. But those who secretly diminish you will keep pressing, just to see how much you'll tolerate. It's their way of establishing control, of reminding you that your boundaries don't matter, that your comfort is secondary to their desires. And here's the hidden danger: the more you allow, the more they take. A small joke at your expense becomes public humiliation. A small intrusion into your space becomes a pattern of disregard. What begins as a test ends as a habit, and suddenly you're no longer standing in your power. But here's the truth: every boundary you set is a declaration of self-respect. When you say, "This is my limit," you're not being difficult, you're protecting your dignity. And those who truly care for you will respect that. Those who don't will reveal themselves sooner or later. So pay attention. Notice who listens when you speak your limits and who laughs them off. Notice who pauses when you say no and who pushes harder. Because boundaries are more than rules. They are mirrors. They reflect who values you and who only values what they can take from you. And the moment you start honoring your own boundaries, you'll see clearly who deserves a place in your life and who only came to test how far they could cross. There's a special kind of hidden demon, one that doesn't attack you directly, doesn't laugh at your pain, doesn't even openly cross your boundaries. Instead, they study you. They watch the way you speak, the choices you make, the dreams you chase, and slowly they begin to copy. At first, it might feel flattering. They like your style, they admire your ideas, they mirror your personality. But soon it becomes unsettling, because it's no longer admiration, it's imitation. They're not trying to be inspired by you, they're trying to become you. Shi Heng Yi warns that this imitation is far from harmless. A dangerous imitator doesn't just mimic your strengths, they use your identity as a tool. They may copy your way of speaking to gain influence. They may steal your ideas and present them as their own. They may even step into spaces you worked hard to build, taking credit for the path you carved. And here's the cruelest part. While they wear your image, they often twist it. They use your light to gain trust, but behind the scenes, they plant seeds of doubt about you. Suddenly, people see two versions of you, the real one and the distorted reflection crafted by your imitator. This is not coincidence. It's a strategy. By becoming your shadow, they hope to blur the lines until others can't tell who the original truly is. And in that confusion, they rise, while you're left questioning how someone you once trusted could betray you this way. But here's the truth. No matter how convincing the imitation, it will always lack the essence. Because what makes you you isn't just the outer expression, it's the inner spirit, the authenticity that can't be replicated. Your journey, your scars, your resilience, those cannot be stolen. So instead of shrinking when someone tries to become you, stand taller, shine brighter. Because the stronger your authenticity, the faster their mask begins to crack. An imitator may borrow your appearance, but they can never carry your soul. And in time, the world always recognizes the difference between a copy and the original. Some demons don't attack you with anger. They don't even try to become you. Instead, they use something far more subtle, far more powerful: guilt. Guilt is one of the heaviest chains a human heart can carry, and those who know how to use it can control you without lifting a finger. It often begins with small phrases. After everything I've done for you, if you really cared, you would. You owe me this. Each word is designed to make you feel responsible for their happiness, their comfort, their life. And before you know it, you're no longer acting from love or freedom. You're acting from fear of disappointing them. Shi Heng Yi calls this one of the most dangerous traps because guilt doesn't just hold you back. It reshapes your identity. It convinces you that you're never enough, that no matter what you give, it's not sufficient. And so you give more and more until your own needs, your own dreams, your own joy are swallowed whole. The cruel thing about guilt is that it disguises itself as loyalty. You think you're being a good friend, a good child, a good partner. But deep down, you're just carrying the burden someone else refuses to carry themselves. And here's the truth. Real love never chains you with guilt. Real respect never demands your sacrifice as proof of your worth. If someone constantly makes you feel guilty just for existing, for choosing yourself, for drawing a boundary, that's not love, that's manipulation. The moment you recognize this, the chains begin to loosen. Because guilt only has power when you accept it. When you return the responsibility back to where it belongs, when you say, "Your happiness is not my debt to pay," you reclaim your freedom. Yes, it hurts to see the disappointment in their eyes when you no longer bow to their control. But remember, freedom often begins with discomfort, and once you step beyond the chains of guilt, you will breathe again. Because guilt was never meant to define you. It was only ever meant to teach you where love ends and where manipulation begins. Long before betrayal becomes visible, before masks fall, before words finally expose themselves, your mind already knows. It whispers, it stirs, it sends you subtle warnings like an invisible alarm ringing inside. Have you ever felt it? That strange unease you couldn't explain. Maybe everything looked fine on the surface. The smile was warm, the words were sweet, the actions seemed harmless. And yet, something didn't feel right. That's your mind trying to protect you. Shi Heng Yi reminds us that the human spirit carries a natural defense system, intuition. It's not always loud. It's not dramatic. It's often just a quiet voice that says, "Be careful." But because we live in a world that worships logic, we often dismiss it. We tell ourselves, "I'm just overthinking." And by silencing that inner alarm, we walk straight into traps we could have avoided. The mind doesn't just warn you with thoughts, it warns you with feelings. The heaviness in your chest, the tension in your stomach, the unease that lingers even when someone's words sound perfect. These signals are not accidents. They are your inner wisdom refusing to be fooled by appearances. Those who secretly harm us are experts at creating illusions. They polish their stories, they craft their images, they even mimic affection. But no matter how perfect their act, your subconscious notices the cracks. A hesitation in their voice, a contradiction in their story, a flicker of insincerity in their eyes. Your conscious mind may ignore it, but your deeper self never does. And here's the lesson. Intuition doesn't demand proof. It doesn't wait for evidence. It moves before the damage is done. That's why learning to listen to your inner warnings is one of the greatest protections you'll ever have. So the next time unease washes over you, don't rush to silence it. Pause, listen, trust it. Because the invisible alarm ringing within isn't weakness. It's your greatest shield. And more often than not, it will save you from the very demons your eyes could not yet see. The greatest danger of hidden demons isn't just their lies, their manipulation, or their masks. It's the way they respond to your light. Your light is your joy, your growth, your authenticity. It's the quiet strength that shines through when you stay true to yourself. And for those who live in shadows, nothing is more threatening. Have you noticed how some people grow uncomfortable when you start to rise? When you achieve something new, they downplay it. When you express happiness, they change the subject. When you step into your power, they suddenly pull away. This is no accident. Your light exposes what they've been hiding from: their fear, their jealousy, their refusal to grow. And instead of being inspired, they try to dim you. Shi Heng Yi explains that this is one of the clearest signs of hidden demons. They cannot stand your radiance, so they throw subtle shade. They remind you of your past mistakes. They exaggerate your flaws. They plant doubts just when you're about to take your next step. At first, it feels small, almost harmless, but little by little it chips away at your confidence, until one day you find yourself shrinking, laughing less, dreaming less, shining less, just to make others comfortable. But here's the truth: your light was never meant to be hidden. You weren't born to dim yourself for the sake of someone else's insecurity. And the moment you realize this, everything changes, because your light isn't just about you, it's about everyone you touch. When you stand tall, you inspire. When you stay true, you empower. And when you refuse to be dimmed, you give silent permission for others to shine too. So guard your light fiercely. Protect it from those who feel threatened by it. And remember, the ones who truly love you will never fear your brightness. They will celebrate it because your glow makes the whole world brighter. At the end of it all, after the masks, the twisted truths, the stolen energy, and the attempts to dim your light, there remains one sacred thing that no demon can touch unless you allow it: your inner peace. Peace isn't found in a world without conflict. It isn't found by controlling others or by making everyone love you. Peace begins when you refuse to hand over the keys to your mind, your heart, your spirit. Shi Heng Yi teaches that awareness is the greatest shield. When you see clearly, you stop being deceived. When you listen to your intuition, you stop walking into traps. And when you guard your light, you stop shrinking for those who cannot handle your shine. Inner peace is not weakness. It is strength in its purest form. It is the calm that cannot be shaken, the silence that cannot be poisoned, the stillness that cannot be stolen. And this peace grows stronger every time you choose yourself over manipulation, every time you honor your boundaries, every time you trust the invisible alarm ringing inside you. Yes, demons will appear in many forms, sometimes even in faces you love. But when your heart is rooted in awareness, when your soul is anchored in truth, they cannot touch you. Their shadows may circle, but they will never pierce the sanctuary you've built within. So as this journey closes, remember, protect your peace like you would protect your life, because in many ways it is your life. And when you live from that place of unshakable stillness, no mask, no manipulation, no shadow can ever control you again. Your light remains, your spirit remains, and your peace, your most precious treasure, remains untouchable. If these words touch something deep within you, if they helped you see a little clearer, breathe a little calmer, or guard your heart a little stronger, then let this not be the end of our journey together. Subscribe to Zen Buddhism Wisdom so you can walk with us through more teachings, more reflections, and more reminders to return home to yourself. Share this with someone who may be silently carrying battles you cannot see. Sometimes, a single word of wisdom is enough to turn their path toward light. And as you leave here today, carry this with you. Peace is not something you find outside. It is something you cultivate within. Protect it, nurture it, and let it shine, because your light is needed in this world. Until we meet again, stay grounded, stay aware, and stay at peace.